There's a moment in your childhood that never leaves you. Not your birthday. Not a vacation. It's the moment you realize you are not loved. I was 17 when my parents told me to hop in the car. We're just making a quick stop. They said it was some kind of aid program. A temporary thing. They told me to wait in the lobby. Then they left. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. An hour. The night got colder, slowly, like the truth sinking into my skin. They weren't coming back. They'd dropped me off at a homeless shelter. No money. No phone. No warning. No love. Something inside me died that night, the part that still believed family meant safety. 17, I didn't start a new chapter. I started surviving. And I did. I lived. I worked. I rose. At 37, I saw them again. Not at a reunion. Not with hugs. They were living in a house, one of the properties owned by my real estate company. And this time, I held the keys. Before the shelter, before the silence, before the last look my mother gave me as she turned her face to the window, there was noise. A kind of loudness that clung to the walls of our small apartment, where love should have lived but never did. My family didn't yell in ways that made headlines. They didn't hit in ways that left marks you could point to. But the bruises were there, silent, invisible, and constant. Every missed hug. Every cold stare. Every dinner eaten in silence while the TV drowned out our absence from each other. That's how it was in my house, people existing side by side, pretending to be a family. My father, if you can call him that, drank more than he worked. He had this hunched way of walking, like life owed him something and had taken it back without warning. He didn't speak much, and when he did, it was always one of three things: a complaint about money, a bitter memory from when he could have made it, or a muttered insult toward me for things I never did. I learned early on how to disappear into corners. How to hold my breath in rooms full of smoke and sarcasm. How to be silent in the face of disappointment, especially when the disappointment was me. My mother was cold in a different way. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't slam doors. Her punishments were colder: distance, indifference, withdrawal. She'd say things like, "Why can't you be easier?" or "We've sacrificed so much for you," as if I'd asked to be born. Her way of parenting was subtraction, slowly removing love until you weren't sure if it had ever been there in the first place. She was the type who smiled for neighbors but flinched when I tried to hug her. She loved appearances more than people. And I never once heard her say, "I'm proud of you." I wasn't a difficult kid, not in the way they claimed. I wasn't out partying, or skipping school, or wrecking cars. I got decent grades, kept to myself, tried hard to stay invisible. But in a house like that, even silence is a crime. My quietness made them uncomfortable. My need for connection made them feel trapped. Every time I asked for something, a ride to school, a jacket for winter, help with an application, it came with eye rolls, muttered complaints, or long, punishing sighs that said, "You're a burden." So I stopped asking. And they seemed relieved. But there were small mercies. Teachers who stayed after class to check on me. A librarian who once let me read until closing time and gave me leftover cookies from the break room. Strangers, kind, distant, brief, who showed more humanity in 5 minutes than my family had in 17 years. I began to collect those moments. File them away in the back of my mind. Proof that maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I did deserve more than bare survival. And then came the night that split my life in half. It was December, a week before Christmas. Cold in that brutal Midwest kind of way, where the wind doesn't just sting, it punishes. I remember sitting on the torn back seat of our car, hands clenched in my sleeves, staring out at the frost-painted window as we drove through unfamiliar streets. I asked where we were going. My dad grunted. My mom said something about, just a stop, and told me to be quiet. She didn't look at me when she said it. We pulled into the parking lot of a squat, gray building. The sign said, Temporary Housing Services. I didn't understand. Thought maybe we were volunteering. Maybe they were signing papers for aid. Maybe, and this is how naive I still was, they were finally getting us help. I remember feeling a flicker of hope. That this cold concrete place, might be the start of something better. They walked in with me. The lady at the desk smiled, handed them a clipboard. My mom filled something out without speaking. I was told to sit and wait. I did. 10 minutes later, the lady, her name was Marissa, I'd learn later, called me over and said gently, your parents just left. They won't be back tonight. I laughed. Actually laughed. I thought it was a mistake. A prank. Something temporary. No, I said, they're just outside. Marissa's eyes didn't move. She just held out a blanket. They said you'd be safer here, she whispered, and that they can't take care of you anymore. The sentence didn't land all at once. It arrived in pieces, like snow melting slowly through a coat. Safer here. Can't take care of you. Not coming back. I walked outside. The car was gone. I stared at the empty space where they'd parked. I must have stood there for 20 minutes, hoping, begging, for it to be some kind of sick joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was a decision. A signature. A severing. A deliberate act of abandonment, made with full awareness. They didn't just leave me. They handed me over. That night, I slept on a cot next to a kid who had bruises under his eye and a baby sister in his lap. He was 13. He didn't ask me why I was there. Maybe he already knew. Maybe the reason doesn't matter when your whole world fits in a trash bag. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't broken, but because even the tears had been taken. What was left wasn't grief. It was something colder. Quieter. The beginning of becoming someone else. I lived at that shelter for 6 months. Learned how to eat when food came. Learned how to sleep through sirens and shouting. Learned how to trust no one, but still smile like I did. I got a job sweeping at a diner. Saved every dollar like it was armor. Got my GED with help from a counselor who believed in me more than I knew how to believe in myself. And I never heard from them. Not a text. Not a call. Not even a forwarded letter. They disappeared like I'd never existed, like 17 years had been a long, inconvenient mistake they could finally erase. But I didn't erase. I built. Slowly. Quietly. Brick by emotional brick, job by exhausting job, I built something out of the ashes they left me in. Not for them. Not even for revenge, not yet. Just to survive. To prove, to myself more than anyone, that I was still here. Still standing. I would carry the weight of that night for years. Every rejection echoed it. Every failure fed it. But so did every win. Every quiet success, a job offer, a scholarship, a meal I didn't have to steal, whispered, they were wrong about you. And in time, I started to believe it. There's something about rock bottom they never tell you. It doesn't always come with drama. Sometimes, it's just quiet. You wake up in a shelter bed that isn't yours, around people you didn't choose, and you go through motions that barely resemble living. No one expects anything from you, and that's both terrifying and freeing. For the first time, the weight of expectation was gone. There was no parent to disappoint, no family to embarrass. I belonged to no one. And in that nothingness, I found space to become. At first, the goals were small. Eat 3 meals a day. Keep a part-time job. Don't flinch when someone raises their voice. Show up to GED classes, even if your hands are shaking. The diner I worked at was a place that smelled like fried onions and burnt coffee, and if you stayed long enough, you could tell what kind of day it was by the tone of the cook's curses. I started out cleaning tables and mopping floors. Most of the time, customers didn't look at me. I was the invisible kid with tired eyes and clothes too big. But the owner, Sal, noticed. He didn't say much, never asked why a 17-year-old was working every night till close, but he'd slide me an extra sandwich when business was slow, and once, without a word, he left a pair of winter gloves in the back with my name written on the tag. The first gift I'd received in years. School was harder. Not the material, the people. GED classes were full of kids who had been kicked around by life, just like me. But I didn't know how to talk to them. I had forgotten how to be a teenager. I didn't laugh at their jokes, didn't flirt back, didn't share my story. I sat in the back and did the work like it was the only thing keeping me alive. And maybe, in a way, it was. I passed the GED on the first try. The counselor, Ms. Dorsey, cried more than I did. She'd been the one pushing me to apply for community college. She saw something in me I hadn't even glimpsed. The idea of college seemed laughable, like trying to fly when I just learned how to walk, but she said something I'll never forget: "You've already survived the hardest part. Now you get to choose the life you want." It took me a year to believe her. Community college wasn't glamorous. I took the bus for an hour each way, worked 2 jobs, and lived in a tiny room above a laundromat where the walls were so thin I could hear the woman next door crying in her sleep. But I was learning. Psychology, business ethics, statistics, each class gave me language for the things I'd felt but couldn't name. Trauma. Gaslighting. Abandonment. Drive. I wasn't just studying to pass. I was studying to understand what had been done to me, and how to make sure it would never be done again. During that time, I discovered coding. Not in a fancy lab or with some trendy startup. Just an old laptop and free Wi-Fi in the college library. It started with a tutorial on how to build a simple website. I didn't expect much, just needed a distraction from my own thoughts. But something clicked. Coding gave me control. If I didn't like something, I could rewrite it. If it broke, I could fix it. Unlike life, the logic was clean. Predictable. Just. I began spending every spare moment learning. Forums, YouTube, online classes. I slept 3 hours a night and taught myself how to think like a machine, because the human world had failed me. By 22, I was working as a freelance web developer, building small sites for local shops and nonprofits. The money wasn't much, but it was mine. Every check felt like a middle finger to the past. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was building. Slowly. Quietly. With purpose. I still lived small. A studio apartment. Thrifted clothes. Ramen dinners. But I started investing every extra dollar. Not in flashy stocks or crypto, but in knowledge. Business books. Online workshops. Tax strategy. Real estate forums. I read like my life depended on it, because in many ways, it did. I was playing a long game, and every chapter was a chess piece. At 25, I launched a startup with 2 friends from the coding forums. It wasn't glamorous. We didn't have funding or fancy offices. Just 3 kids who knew how to solve problems and weren't afraid of sleepless nights. Our niche was custom automation tools for small businesses, the kind of thing no one noticed until it stopped working. We called it Dust Layer. No one liked the name, but the clients didn't care. They paid. And they referred others. By 28, we were making real money. Not flashy tech money, but enough to hire a team. Enough to give myself a salary and hire my 2 friends full-time. Enough to finally look in the mirror and see someone I didn't recognize, someone stable, respected, needed. Someone in control. But I wasn't done. That year, I bought my first property. A duplex in a rundown neighborhood, from a man who was desperate to unload it. I fixed it up myself, watched tutorials, learned by doing, and made mistakes that cost me nights of sleep. But I got it done. Rented it out. Then bought another. Then another. Real estate became more than investment. It became structure. Control. A way to turn chaos into cash flow. I built a property management company, not with fanfare, but with relentless systems. Every tenant screened. Every dollar accounted for. Every mistake studied like scripture. By 30, I owned 15 properties. By 33, I stopped counting. I didn't tell anyone about my past. Not my business partners. Not my team. Not even the woman I almost married. That part of me stayed sealed, like an old photograph I couldn't throw away but refused to frame. But I thought about them. My family. Not often, but deeply. I wondered where they lived. If they told people they had a son. If they remembered what they did, or if they had rewritten it in their minds as what had to be done. I never searched for them. Never stalked them online. I told myself it didn't matter. That I was over it. But that was a lie. You don't outgrow abandonment. You just outbuild it. Like living in a house where the basement is full of mold. You keep decorating the upstairs and pretend you don't smell the rot. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, I got an email. It came through my property company's generic inquiry form. The name didn't jump out at first. It was from someone asking for help with an eviction notice. Said they'd been good tenants. That the rent increase was too high. That the owner must not understand how hard things are right now. The signature at the bottom was my mother's. I read the email twice. Then again. Then I opened the tenant database and cross-referenced the name. She and my father were living in one of my properties. A duplex I hadn't visited in 2 years. They were 6 months behind on rent. Ignoring notices. Trying to appeal the eviction by writing to corporate. They didn't know who owned the company. They didn't know I'd see it. They didn't know the 17-year-old they left at a shelter now held the keys to their home. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not angry. Not triumphant. Just quiet. Because the moment I'd spent half my life imagining, the moment I could finally say something, do something, take back something, had arrived. And I didn't know what I was going to do yet. But I knew this. I wouldn't disappear. Not this time. I didn't respond to the email right away. I stared at it for 3 days, flagged it, unflagged it, closed it, reopened it. Every time my mouse hovered over the reply button, something clenched in my chest. It wasn't fear. It was older than fear. Deeper. The muscle memory of a child who'd been told his presence was a burden and learned not to reach for what he needed. But I wasn't that child anymore. And they weren't just strangers living in one of my properties. They were them. The ones who vanished without looking back. The ones who taught me that love came with conditions, and family could be transactional. I had spent 20 years becoming untouchable, and now fate had looped the story back around to the point of origin. And this time, the imbalance was gone. I was no longer small. No longer dependent. No longer invisible. I didn't respond as a son. I responded as a CEO. I forwarded the email to my legal team. I told them to proceed as normal. Follow policy. No special treatment. No escalation. No aggression. Just due process, written with the kind of quiet formality that doesn't blink. The kind of language that once crushed me, that now protected me. I wasn't here for drama. I was here for closure. And control. But curiosity has a heartbeat. 2 weeks later, I drove to the property. I didn't tell my team. Didn't bring anyone. I wore jeans, a plain black sweatshirt, and a cap pulled low. I looked like any other contractor checking up on plumbing or maintenance. The duplex was smaller than I remembered. Peeling paint. Cracked siding. The kind of place that held history like a scar, obvious but untreated. I parked across the street and sat for a long time. There was a light on in the upstairs unit. A faded curtain moved slightly in the breeze of a ceiling fan. A shadow passed, not clear enough to identify, but familiar enough to make my pulse stutter. I wondered if they ever thought about me. If they ever stood by that window and imagined who might own this house. If, when they got the first eviction warning, something inside them whispered, "What if?" They hadn't recognized my name. I made sure of that years ago. Changed it legally when I incorporated the business. No hyphen, no middle initial, nothing traceable. I had erased the last tether to the people who had erased me. Until now. I didn't knock. I didn't call. I just looked, long enough to feel the weight settle, then left. But the story didn't end there. 2 days later, my office called. The tenants in Unit 3B were requesting an emergency meeting. They'd received their final eviction notice. They wanted to speak to someone higher up. They used words like unjust, unexpected, desperate. They sounded afraid. I told my assistant to schedule it. When the day came, I arrived early. The conference room was glass-walled, clean, clinical. A framed cityscape hung on one wall, the company's mission statement on another. Everything was sharp. Measured. Intentional. I sat at the head of the table, hands folded, waiting. The door opened. And there they were. My mother entered first, walking with the same clipped steps I remembered from childhood, like the floor offended her. My father followed, slower, older, his shoulders slumped as though gravity had finally had its say. Their eyes scanned the room, glossed over me, then landed on my assistant. "I'm sorry," my mother said, voice tight, "we were told someone from ownership would be present." "I'm here," I said. They turned. And for a moment, just a beat, they didn't recognize me. Not fully. Not immediately. Time had reshaped me. The angles of my face were sharper. My posture firmer. I was dressed simply, but everything I wore was tailored. Fitted. Silent armor. The kind of presence that doesn't raise its voice, because it never needed to. Then something shifted. My mother's face paled. Her hand clutched her purse. My father blinked, squinted, then widened his eyes as if seeing a ghost. "No," he muttered. "That's not." "Yes," I said. "It's me." Silence. "I believe you requested a meeting." They didn't sit right away. My mother looked at the chair like it was a trap. My father lowered himself slowly, hands trembling slightly. I didn't move. I let the quiet do what it always does, reveal who we really are. "You're the owner," she said finally, voice like glass. "I'm the founder, yes. And CEO. But, this property was purchased 8 years ago. You've been tenants under my company for almost 5. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "I had no idea," she whispered. "I'm aware." My father coughed. We didn't mean to." "To what?" I asked. He swallowed. "To end up like this. To have to ask for help. From you." I studied them. Not with hate. Not even pity. Just distance. Like someone examining the ruins of a town that once exiled him. "You left me," I said softly. "At a shelter. With no money. No explanation. My mother's lips tightened. We thought it was best. No, I said. You thought it was easier. She looked down. My father said nothing. I reached into a folder and slid 2 pieces of paper across the table. Here's your payment history. And here's the legal notice. You're being evicted for breach of contract, failure to pay rent for 6 months. We followed all the standard procedures. There's nothing unique about your case. Nothing personal. My mother scanned the paper with shaking hands. You don't understand what it's been like. I understand exactly what it's like, I said. To be without a home. To be forgotten. You're punishing us, she said. No, I said, steady. I'm enforcing boundaries. They looked at each other, 2 people who'd once decided I wasn't worth keeping. Now sitting across from the life they tried to bury. I can't believe you do this to your own parents, she whispered. I didn't, I said. You did. 20 years ago. She flinched. My father's eyes glossed over. I could have sent someone else to handle this, I added. But I wanted to be here. So you'd know. So there'd be no confusion. The boy you left at that shelter? He owns the ground you stand on. And today, I'm asking you to leave. There was no screaming. No dramatic breakdowns. Just 2 aging people realizing the weight of what they'd once discarded, now grown, thriving, and uninterested in revenge. But justice doesn't need cruelty. Sometimes, it just needs clarity. I stood. I've authorized a relocation stipend, I said. You'll receive it within the week. Use it however you see fit. My mother opened her mouth. Closed it again. For once, she had no script. My father said nothing. I walked out of the room, not looking back. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. I didn't see them again for a week. After the meeting, my team handled all formalities. The relocation stipend was processed, the paperwork sent, the eviction timeline reaffirmed. There was nothing left to say. Nothing that needed repeating. And yet, 7 days later, my assistant buzzed me and said, "You have a visitor." I didn't ask who. I already knew. She walked into my office like someone arriving at confession, not to repent, but to control the story. My mother looked smaller in daylight. She wore a coat that didn't fit and a scarf tied too tightly, like she was trying to hold herself together. She sat without asking. Her eyes scanned the room, the clean furniture, the framed documents, the view of the city. A life she'd never imagined for me. "You changed your name," she said. Her voice had none of the sharpness I remembered. It was thinner. Like something left out in the cold too long. "Yes," I said. "Why?" I met her eyes. "Because I didn't want to carry yours." Silence. She folded her hands. "I wasn't a good mother." I didn't answer. Not because I disagreed, but because the statement didn't require confirmation. Some truths don't need witnesses. "I was scared," she said. "Back then. We were broke. Your father was drinking. I thought it would be better if you had a chance. Somewhere else." "Somewhere else," I repeated. "You mean a homeless shelter?" She winced. "I didn't think you'd stay there." "But you didn't think to check." She looked away. I was ashamed. "You don't get to say that now," I said, softly. "You weren't ashamed when you drove away." Her lip trembled, but I didn't look away. I had waited 2 decades for this. Not the apology, but the confrontation. The recognition. The moment where my pain was no longer a secret I carried alone. "I thought about you," she whispered. "But you didn't come." She nodded, like a child being scolded. I leaned back in my chair. What do you want from me? She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, I want you to understand. It wasn't because I didn't love you. Those words. They landed like a stone in water, deep, slow, and somehow empty. Because love, in my experience, was always followed by a condition. I love you, but. I love you, so. I love you, until. You know, I said, when I was 17, I used to imagine this moment. You walking in, trying to explain. And me telling you to get out. I thought that would feel like victory. She looked up. And does it? No, I said. It feels like a funeral. Her eyes widened. I'm not angry, I continued. I was. For years. But anger has a half-life. Eventually it burns itself out and leaves something colder. I don't want to punish you. I don't want revenge. I just want you to know who I became, in spite of you. Her voice was barely audible. You became incredible. I didn't flinch. No thanks to you. She wiped a tear. I thought you'd hate me. I did, I said. Then I stopped thinking about you. That was worse. We sat there, in that impossible quiet, two people with the same blood, but nothing else. No bond. No warmth. Just shared history wrapped in pain. I didn't come here to ask for anything, she said. Then why did you come? I needed to see you. One last time. Before we leave. I nodded. She stood slowly. Walked to the door. Then paused. You were always smart. Even as a kid. I should have seen who you'd become. I looked out the window. You should have stayed long enough to watch. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I sat there, unmoving, for what felt like hours. Not crying. Not thinking. Just letting the air settle around the truth. I had confronted her. I had spoken what needed to be said. And she had heard it. Not excused. Not forgiven. But heard. That night, I drove to the old shelter. It was still standing, renovated now, with fresh paint and better lighting. The sign out front read, Haven House, a place to begin again. I parked and walked to the entrance. A young man in his 20s greeted me, clipboard in hand. Can I help you? I used to live here, I said. He smiled. Really? You looking for someone? No, I said. Just remembering. He nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. I slipped him a check before I left. A quiet donation. No press release. No ceremony. Just a thank you. For holding space when no one else did. As I walked back to the car, I felt lighter. Not because everything was healed, but because something had closed. A loop. A story. A wound. The confrontation hadn't fixed anything. But it had ended something. And that, finally, was enough. After she left, there was no thunder. No revelation. No epiphany that made the past any easier to hold. The office didn't feel different. The city skyline still blinked behind glass. My desk still had 2 proposals waiting for approval, and my inbox still had meetings stacked into next week. But something had shifted inside me, not dramatically, but permanently. It was like realizing a fire has finally burned itself out. The destruction was still there. The ash still clung to the walls. But the heat was gone. The rage that once curled in my ribs like a sleeping animal had stopped pacing. The wound still ached, but it no longer bled. The truth is, people expect revenge to feel like fireworks. Like justice screaming through the sky. But most of the time, it's quiet. It's showing up to your own life every day, building something out of what they tried to break. It's sitting in a boardroom across from the people who once left you to rot, and not flinching. It's success that doesn't scream their name, but also doesn't need to. They moved out within the month. I didn't go to the property again. My team handled the transition. We had another tenant lined up already, a retired schoolteacher and her niece. When the move-out notice came through, I paused, fingers hovering above the screen. Then I scrolled past it. I didn't need to know where they went. I didn't need to know if they regretted it, if they spoke of me, if they even understood what they'd done. That wasn't mine to carry anymore. I carried myself now. It wasn't as clean as I wanted. Closure never is. There were still nights I'd wake up with fragments of old dreams, a cold bench, a hallway with flickering lights, a voice saying, "Just wait here." There were still moments when I hesitated before asking for help, afraid that any need would be punished. And there were still days I looked at families in the park, loud, imperfect, laughing, and felt something like envy hollow out my chest. Not because I wanted their lives, but because I never got to stop needing one. But life kept moving. The company grew. We expanded to 2 more cities. I hired a director of community housing, someone whose only job was to make sure we never became the kind of landlord that treated people like numbers. I told her, without giving details, that I knew what it felt like to be forgotten in a system that didn't care if you lived or froze. I wanted us to do better. She understood. Some people just do. I also started mentoring. Quietly. Anonymously. Once a month, I sat with kids aging out of the foster system or living in transitional housing and helped them navigate financial aid, job applications, apartment leases. I didn't tell them my story. I didn't need to. I saw the question in their eyes. The hesitation. The hunger to believe they weren't crazy for wanting more. For still having hope. One kid, Marcus, stayed after one session and asked, "How do you know all this stuff?" I smiled. I had to learn it. Fast. He looked at me like I had a secret he wanted to believe in. "You ever think people like us just get stuck forever?" I paused. I used to. But getting stuck and staying stuck aren't the same thing. He nodded slowly. "I think I'm tired of surviving." "Good," I said. "That means you're ready to live." He left with a printed resume and a fire I remembered from my own reflection years ago, back when success felt like science fiction. I didn't tell him the rest. That healing isn't linear. That some days you'll still feel like the kid in the shelter, even when you're wearing a suit. That forgiveness is messy. That sometimes you'll want to call the very people who left you, just to prove they missed out. But you won't. Because you'll learn that the best revenge isn't anger. It's peace. I never forgave them. Not in the storybook way. I didn't call them on Christmas. I didn't check in when the pandemic hit. I didn't send flowers when I heard my father had a heart condition. I didn't even ask how they were doing. But I did one thing. I didn't become them. That mattered more than anything. Years later, a journalist requested an interview. She was doing a piece on entrepreneurs who had overcome adversity. I almost declined. I didn't do media. I didn't need the spotlight. But something in her letter struck me. She wasn't chasing drama. She was searching for roots. She wanted to understand why people build, and what they're really building against. So I agreed. We met in a quiet cafe, no cameras. She asked gentle questions. About risk, discipline, vision. Then, halfway through, she leaned in and asked, "What drives you now?" I thought about it. And I said, "Legacy." She raised her eyebrows. "Not the kind with buildings named after me. But the kind that shows up in someone else's life when I'm not around." A safer apartment. A scholarship. A hand that doesn't let go. She smiled. That's a rare answer. I nodded. So was the life that made it. When the article came out, it didn't mention the shelter. It didn't name the company. It didn't reveal anything that could tie back to my parents. But it ended with one line I'll always remember. Sometimes, the fire meant to destroy you becomes the very thing that forges your future. I clipped it. Not for me. But for the version of me who once slept on a cot next to a stranger, thinking he didn't matter. I keep it in my drawer. Right next to a folded-up intake form from Haven House, dated 20 years ago. My name. Age 17. Under next of kin, it says, none provided. That used to hurt. Now it reminds me I started from zero, and made it mean something. There's no ceremony for becoming your own person. No fanfare. No switch that flips. You just wake up one day, and the weight you've been dragging for years feels a little lighter. Not gone, just manageable. You walk past mirrors and don't flinch. You say your name out loud, and it doesn't tremble. You look at what you've built, the home, the work, the small quiet ways you belong to the world, and realize it's yours. Not a performance. Not a survival strategy. Not a rebellion. Just yours. For most of my life, I was building out of reaction. Every decision, every milestone, every dollar earned was a defiance. I worked to prove I mattered. I studied to prove I wasn't worthless. I invested to prove I could hold the things no one thought I'd ever touch. But somewhere in that climb, the fire changed shape. It stopped burning with rage. It started glowing with intention. I stopped working past midnight. I stopped obsessing over perfection. I stopped saying yes just to feel needed. I started saying no. Softly, clearly, without apology. I bought a house, not to impress anyone, but because it had a porch where I could sit in the evenings and hear the wind in the trees. I filled it with things I chose, old books, quiet music, plants that needed care but not attention. It wasn't big. It wasn't flashy. It was steady. And for the first time in my life, so was I. I got a dog. Her name's Luna. A rescue, of course, half-blind, a little anxious, loyal in that quiet way only animals know how to be. She doesn't care what I do for a living. She just curls beside me at night, breathes steady, and reminds me what safety feels like. People ask me if I ever reconnected with my parents. If we patched things up. As if that's the natural arc of every story, pain, rupture, then a hallmark reconciliation wrapped in hugs and forgiveness. But real life isn't a circle. It's a path. And not all paths double back. No, we didn't reconnect. We didn't become a family again. And I no longer expect to. But that doesn't mean I carry hate. It means I've made peace with absence. Some people heal by rebuilding bridges. Others heal by learning to live on the other side of the river. And I'm okay with that. Sometimes I still wonder. In quiet moments. What they tell themselves. What they tell others. If they still believe I'm bitter. If they tell stories where they're victims of circumstance. If they think of me at all. But I don't chase those answers. Because the boy who needed them, the boy who waited at the shelter, watching every car that passed, isn't the one living my life now. I am. I mentor more these days. Not just once a month. I fund internships. I run workshops. I sponsor scholarships under a foundation name that doesn't include mine. I visit shelters, quietly, and leave envelopes behind. No logos. No signatures. Just help. Not because I want to be seen. But because I remember what it's like to be invisible. One night, a teenage girl, no more than 16, lingered after a workshop. She had that look I knew too well, guarded, tired, waiting to be disappointed. "You really used to be in foster care?" she asked. "No," I said. "Worse. I was left behind by people who were supposed to love me." She blinked. Didn't ask for details. Just nodded, like she understood the shape of that kind of wound. "You seem okay now." I smiled. "Most days." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she asked, "Does it get better?" I thought about how to answer. How not to lie. How not to break the soft hope in her voice. "It gets different," I said. "You get stronger. You learn how to carry things. And one day, you realize the things you carry don't carry you anymore." She nodded again. A small smile. Then left. That's the legacy I want. Not headlines. Not trophies. Just that. A kid walking away a little lighter than they came in. Sometimes I visit the old shelter. Not out of nostalgia. Out of reverence. That place didn't save me. But it held me when nothing else did. I walk the hallways. I look at the newer bunks, the brighter lights, the bulletin boards with job postings and birthday cards. I stand at the front desk and look at the clipboard. I think about all the names written there. All the stories just beginning, or being rewritten. And then I leave, quietly, the way I arrived. I still have that intake form. It's tucked into a drawer at home, behind tax files and property deeds. Every once in a while, I pull it out and read it. Name, redacted. Age, 17. Emergency contact, none provided. Medical conditions, not applicable. Status, temporary placement. That last line always gets me. Temporary placement. If only they knew. Sometimes, the most temporary moments in your life leave the most permanent marks. And sometimes, the things meant to break you become the blueprint for everything you build. I don't wear my pain like a badge anymore. I wear it like skin, part of me, but not all of me. I don't introduce myself with my story. But I never deny it, either. It made me. It sharpened me. It taught me to live without applause. To trust action more than promises. To become the home I never had. There's a photo on my desk now. It's not of my parents. Not of me at some gala or award ceremony. It's a candid shot of Luna sleeping beside a little boy from the neighborhood who comes by sometimes when his mom works late. He reads to her. She listens. It's ordinary. Gentle. Unremarkable to anyone but me. But to me, it's everything. Because that's the life I chose to build. Not in defiance. Not in grief. But in peace. And that, finally, is enough.